Welcome to our series. We're going to home in on the legal sector now. My name is Rhian Delval. I'm the Director of Enterprise and Partnerships here at Credas. I'm joined with two very special guests. So we have Mike.
Hi, yep, I'm Mike Ross. I'm the Head of Risk and Compliance at a Scottish law firm called Anderson Strathern, and I'm also the firm's Money Laundering Reporting Officer.
Brilliant. And thank you very much for coming down to Wales today. And Luke.
Hello, I'm Luke Haddon. I'm the Money Laundering Reporting Officer for Keystone Law.
Brilliant. So again, thank you for travelling down as well to sunny Wales today. I really appreciate it. So in these episodes, like I said, we're going to home in on the legal sector. Our first episode, we cover, are we actually compliant? So that's a big question. And it's something that we get quite a lot in Credas. The clients will ask us, what do we have to do to be compliant, and are we compliant? And what I found is it varies on firm, because a lot of it is dependent on your risk appetite and your approach. So today we'll be covering the sort of where compliance does break down, the differences between different types of law and the firms and whatnot as well, how larger firms, you both work for large firms, how they cope with consistency across a number of different fee earners and different types of law that you guys would deal with day to day. And as MLROs, you guys are responsible, but does that give you the kudos, I suppose, within the business and the might to be able to, enforce these regulations? Because at the end of the day, it sort of lands on your heads, doesn't it? And then the risk-based approach, rather than it just being a box-ticking exercise, how you guys cope with that. And then identity verification as well. Is it enough? Is it not enough? What are the sort of things that you guys see day to day, and the tools and the risk approaches that you use as well? So that's what we're going to be covering today. So I'll jump straight into it. So compliance should be getting easier with all of the tools we have access to, but I believe it's getting harder. So I'm joined by Luke and Mike today, and I just want to go through sort of the current landscape of compliance. And I think where we'll start is with a property transaction. So let's say, for example, I'm a buyer, I've just bought a house. What sort of process do I need to go through as the buyer, and do you and your firms need to go through to onboard me and verify me through the whole transaction? So if we start with, I've just put an offer in, I've come to one of your firms, what can I expect? Where do we start?
I think the big part of it's the ID verification point. I think that's where a lot of the turbulence and turmoil comes in for both clients and professionals alike. I think hopefully what you should expect from whatever professional service you're instructing, whether that be a lawyer or a estate agent, I would expect to be asked quite a number of questions at the outset, to be around who you are, what do you do, where does your money come from, all that sort of thing, and trust and understand that that's part of the process to know who you are, and be able to meet these regulations that, as you say, are tightening and tightening all the time. And I think that the other part of that, which I think surprises clients often, is the level of verification that needs to happen on that. And again, I think I would just go into a transaction knowing that it's show me, don't tell me. You're going to tell me these things, but after that, I'm going to ask for a small amount, maybe sometimes a large amount of evidence to back up what you're telling us, and that's for no other reason than the law says that we have to do it, not because we distrust you or think you're up to no good. We just have to do it.
Yeah. And I think the key thing as well is it has got harder, it has changed over the years. And, if someone bought a property 10 years ago compared to to now, and the questions that you're having to ask now, and all of the data that you're having to collate is very different, isn't it? And do you find that with buyers and sellers and any clients really within the firm? Do you find that's why they're asking questions, because it has differed over the last couple of years, or has changed quite a bit?
Yeah, the landscape, I think, has gone a bit crazy in the last 10 years. I think probably from 2017, when the money laundering regulations changed, we've seen a big push, not just in anti-money laundering related regulation, but across the board, financial crime more widely, and just generally regulation as a whole, really pushing responsibility down into professional organisations. So yeah, it has become really challenging for everybody, consumers and the professional industries.
Firms as well.
I think that's key, Mike. It's around changing the mindset in the lawyer pool as well, what they're expecting to do and what they're expected to ask of their clients as well. And I think the profession more widely is still trying to catch up with, do I actually have to ask these things of my client? Because it's a client service at the end of the day, and it's giving people the tools to ask those questions in the easiest way possible with the least impact, that it feels compliancy. It's drawing out that information that builds the wider risk picture in the easiest way possible.
Yeah. And on that note, I think we see so many different processes across so many different firms. Are there any key things that you're seeing, Luke, with regards to other firms or firms thinking they're doing correctly, but they're actually not? Or, are there any sort of, I don't know the words, but any sort of things that people are like, oh, we should do this, but actually that's not right? What are you seeing? Because I know you speak to a lot of, people in the same shoes as you, and you as well, Mike. I know you're involved in quite a few fraud forums, aren't you? But is there any common indicators or common things that people are doing incorrectly, do you think, in the sector?
I think in this space, it's really catching up. Mike mentioned it earlier around it's wider anti-financial crime. It's not just anti-money laundering any longer. And there's so many acronyms in this space to understand, well, actually, what are we trying to do here? Yeah. It's not just ID&V. ID&V is the easy part, in my view, in the wider aspect, to prove who your client is and get reasonably comfortable. Now, technology and compliance teams can help in this regard, no doubt, but it's the wider KYC piece. It's know your client, and that is as reliant upon fee earners asking the right questions, developing the right profile, and understanding, is this normal? And the easier we can do that, and the more we can gear the profession towards understanding, well, actually, this makes sense or this doesn't make sense, and here's why. That's going to feed into the wider piece, which is around where you and I sit in as money laundering reporting officers. We can only report and develop the wider kind of holistic anti-financial crime profile of a firm if we know what's going on. And that's culture driven. That's people speaking to compliance when they should be speaking to compliance.
Yeah, I think there's also a degree here of things being practical and proportionate. Quite often I'll see firms where they have very long, very protracted policies and procedures, but what they actually do on the ground is nothing like what they've got written down on paper. And you speak to firms and they'll say, oh, I just don't have the time to do this sort of thing. So I think for me, if you're sitting in a role where you're responsible for it, I think the starting point is, what can I actually achieve? Not necessarily what do I think the regulations or the regulator expects of me. Because I think even though you might not get to exactly that sort of gold standard that is touted on LinkedIn and all that sort of thing, then at least you're having a better chance of getting to something that is actually workable for you.
It's common sense as well, and like you've both said, asking the right questions and whatnot. I think, it's not a one case, one policy fits all. Especially if you're a multi-area law firm as well. There are different rules and regulations for different types, isn't there? And at the size that both of your firms operate, like how hard is it to make sure that ID verification and AML rules are being followed, when you're dealing with multiple fee earners, multiple secretaries, multiple different people within the business that have to comply with these rules and regulations? Like how hard is it to get that consistent approach across the business?
I mean, I think I would probably argue that it's easier for a much larger firm to do that, because I think you get to a size where you go, the only way we can control this is by having a central hub, and that's the way that we operate. We have a central compliance team. Now, that I absolutely understand, the elephant in the room is that's a luxury that lots of firms don't have. So yeah, we have the benefit of, a team of almost 15 now across regulatory compliance as a whole, but a team of 7 now dedicated to AML compliance and onboarding and conflict checking and all that sort of stuff. So our route is to say, yes, we have the solicitors at the coalface speaking to the clients and gathering the documents and asking the questions of the clients and all that sort of thing, but we effectively gatekeep it. And have system controls and all that in place to make sure that we don't allow a risk to enter the business because of inconsistencies in the way that it's applied. But again, that is an easier way to do it when you get to a size that you can do that. Smaller firms, I think for me, it's all about practical training to say, don't just go out and train your staff on the 7 or 8 points that the regulations force you to train about. Actually make your training practical for the people that are doing the job, and most importantly, ensure that you're introducing the idea that the regulations allow for flexibility, so you can adapt what ID verification you get or source of funds evidence that you gather based on the client that's in front of you. You don't have to force your client through a one-size-fits-all approach. And by giving them that flexibility, you're more likely to have people do it right because they can apply the right options to their clients.
Do you see the same?
I think that's really interesting, right? Because you're exactly right. The larger firms are far better at approaching the risk-based approach because they have subject matter experts in the compliance arena that can take the time to sit down and read the regulations and update themselves as to, well, actually, how do we make this defensible within our AML policies and our practice-wide risk assessment? Smaller firms don't have that luxury. They don't have the time to be able to step aside out of their day and think, well, actually, I'm going to take 2 days to rewrite my practice-wide risk assessment here. They are balancing this against paying the bills at the end of the month because it's a small practice. And that's the other thing. It's around, as you say, training your staff appropriately. What you want is people to stick their hands in the air and speak to the right person at the appropriate time. And whether that is a large firm like ours, the MLRO or the compliance team generally, or even in your practice manager, the Law Society of Scotland no doubt is a professional ethics line, so does the SRA, so does the Law Society. There are tools there. It's about gearing your practice to understand, well, actually, I'm not in this alone. The whole purpose of this is trying to stop financial crime and giving people the right tools to think, I can do this. It's not just, it's ostriches don't work in compliance. I've got giraffes on it. But it isn't about sticking your head in the sand and things are going to get better. Things only get worse in that way. Speak early, train your people to do that as well.
Do you not suffer then with larger firms and smaller firms as well? Do you not suffer with feeling as, I've known this guy for 20 years, I've been acting for him for 20 years, and, why do I now need to get his ID? Or, we beyond that now because obviously the legislation changed in 2017.
I think clients are beyond it as well. Clients understand that we live in a compliance landscape today, and just your senior partner saying, well, I've known him for 20, 25 years, I can vouch for him. That's not your client is probably going to say, okay, well, they have to do this. Like, they understand that that's part of it. And that goes back to what I mentioned earlier around changing the mindset as much within our lawyer pool as it is within the public more generally that we're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit of a misconception about I've known my client for 20 years, well, you can't rely on that at all. Luke mentioned earlier about the holistic approach, it's all about knowing your client and understanding who your client is and all that sort of thing. So I think there is absolutely a place for, I've known this guy for 20 years, but I think it just needs to be formalised a little bit to say, well, I have known him for 20 years, but I've never got his copy of his passport. So, okay, let's tick that box and get the passport and, do that bit, but also take it that step further and say, well, actually, tell me a bit about what you've gathered over the 20 years about that person, because so much knowledge resides in solicitors' heads from the relationships that they have. And we talk regularly about, saying, well, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. And that's a bit of a compliance audit,
I think it's the same in everything, even in my sector, if there's no notes, it didn't happen. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's the key as well, is to write as many sort of notes as you can and store as much, information to back up that you have been dealing with someone for 20 or 25 years.
The reality is, though, the commercial and service outcomes, which we have to be mindful of in risk and compliance as well. It's not just about meeting the rules. It has to be meeting the rules in a commercial organisation that work for profitability, that work for delivering a good client service. If you tell me what's in your head, it'll probably lead to me not having to get you to ask your client something because you know the answer. So there is elements to it of going, right, well, yes, we have the law to meet, but also you can help yourself make this easier.
Yeah.
I think a lot of what we do in this space as well is around regulator defensibility. It's understanding that your regulator or your auditor, whatever it might be, is going to come in one day and say, show me what you did. Yeah. And the sooner you get, again, that I've said it multiple times, it's mindset. It's ensuring that people buy into the process. And that's all about building the right firm culture. And that's led from the very top. If you get the right people in place who can garner that passion for actually, it is compliance, but it's just good practice as well. And something is easy to write down. The tools are so easily there nowadays. We've all got phones that have umpteen different dictation tools on them in different ways, and it can write the notes for us. If you're taking 2 minutes aside to do that and put something down on your file, the end product is immensely kind of more powerful.
Maybe a little short-term pain, but long-term gain, because like you said, when the regulators come in and then you've got to dig it all out, if it's all there in front of you and you've got everything from the start, then, that's a good place for the regulators to start with you, isn't it?
I mean, we're in a space as well where you've got the SFO, the NCA, whoever, the police more generally can come in up to 6 years after the fact and say, well, show me what was on the file at the time. And as awful as it is, there is power in that kind of persuasion tool of saying, well, actually, we've given you the policies, controls and procedures are all there. If you step outside of that, yes, that's slightly on us, but it's far more on you. And that is going to be a lot of pain later down the line for very little gain in the position right now.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's what we see day in, day out as well, and remediation as well. So, once you've had results from, an ID check with us, an AML check with us, and maybe there is a PEP and sanction hit, how have you remediated it from that to a pass? And you're right, it's all about documenting everything you do. And talking about documentation, I suppose source of funds is the next bit of documentation that you guys need to collect after running the ID check, or maybe before. So we've got a full episode, by the way, on source of funds, so I don't want to go into it too deep right now, but where does the source of funds come in the process, Luke? Like, is it done at point of onboarding? Like, where does source of funds fit within your process?
It absolutely initially has to sit within your matter process onboarding. Absolutely. It fits into your client matter risk assessment. Do you want to work for this person? Generally, if they don't have the money to buy the house at the end of the day. Yeah. So, but that's very different to what is proof of funds and what is true source of funds. And even then at the client matter risk assessment stage, what you're probably looking at more generally is around that kind of source of wealth more broadly. It goes back to know your client. It goes back to does this all make sense as to what I know about this person now? But that's where ongoing monitoring and the wider process comes in. I know other firms say, well, actually, you need to get your 6 months of bank statements on day one, and we need to have it there. But that doesn't tell you where the funds came from if they were all accumulated in month 7. It's building out the wider picture of what's going on and saying this makes sense because. And I think if you take too much of a tick box approach of, well, we've been told to get 6 months of bank statements, here's a 6 months of bank statements, and there's no thought that goes into the wider client matter risk assessment, then you're off to a bad start immediately there.
Yeah. Does it differ with Haddon and Strathern?
No, I mean, a lot of that, what Luke was saying there really resonates with me. I mean, I think there's a practical element to it to say so much of the money laundering risk generally, but in property transactions is tied up in where the money comes from. So if I was to say, I'm not going to say this, but if I was to say forget absolutely everything apart from one thing, the one thing would be that, source of funds, you need to gather the information at the start so that you can do your client and matter risk assessment to determine the level of due diligence. And then once you know the level of due diligence, you know how much verification that you need to do. And this very simple rule, take this with a pinch of salt, is low to no risk information, some risk information, small amount of verification, high risk information, and lots of verification. So not only does it help you keep in line with the regulations, by doing it properly, it also means that you're also not wasting time by going away and getting 6 months bank statements right at the very start when you maybe only need to get 1 month, or your client says, well, actually, it's all come from inheritance, and 6 months bank statements is absolutely useless when you maybe need to be thinking about documentation from solicitors showing that the money came from an inheritance. So it's more about being a bit surgical with your questions and the steps that you go through afterwards, and you can only do that by, asking the questions right.
Relevant questions. Yeah.
I mean, conveyance is a really good kind of topic to kind of think about source of funds more generally, because in the legal sector, at least, conveyancing is quite a low margin product. Like, you do not charge by the hour. Typically, it's fixed fee, and if you ask for 6 months of bank statements, what you're asking for is your lawyer to go through those 6 months of bank statements, technically line by line, and pick out anything that's big round numbers, clearly below reporting thresholds for the banks and the like as well, cash transactions in and out. If they're doing that job properly over a 6 month period, and let's face it, they might have multiple accounts as well, all margin is immediately gone there. You go back to, it's a commercial endeavour that we are undertaking here. Tech does fit into this, no doubt, and supplements what we are doing, but it has to be risk-based as well. So building that wider picture, and it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, is source of funds is one thing, but I think that flows from understanding the wider source of wealth for your client and building the picture out, because your evidence has to fit the wider risk profile, and it's simple at the end of the day, he says.
So most of the time it's simple, but I imagine you have quite a lot of clients where their source of wealth and source of funds is very complex as well. And let's face it, all of that takes time. The compliance piece does take time. It's not just about ID verification, AML checks, source of funds, your risk assessments. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and that is time consuming. So with the pressures, me as a consumer buying a house, I want it to complete today. I've put an offer in today and I want it to complete today. And, thank God I'm not one of your clients, because I'll probably be on the phone to you all the time. But there are time pressures, and these things do take time. So how do you balance that, where your fee earners, your clients want to get the deal over the line, and you've got to do all of these checks? Like, how do you balance that, and how do you cope with that sort of pressure, I suppose, as well?
I think maybe two quick points. Managing expectations, so being very upfront with either the fee earner to the client or the compliance team to the solicitor, to say, this is what we need to do and this is what you should expect, and as best as you can lay out that timeline for whoever it is you're creating the expectation for. And then the second thing, I'll not get into it because it can be quite long-winded, but I would encourage everyone to look at a psychological study in the 80s called The Power of Because, and that just is absolute cast iron proof that whatever you ask someone to do, you have to tell them why. So bring your client, bring your solicitor on that journey with you to say, we need to do this, here's what you can expect in terms of response times or questions that we're going to ask, and the reason we need to do it is this. And by and large, people will accept that. They may not always be happy with it, but they accept and understand it, and then they'll come along that journey with you, regardless of how onerous it is, really.
I think we have to recognise as well that technology is moving so quickly nowadays as well, that client expectations will move quickly with this also. But this is an opportunity more than anything. I think law firms generally are very slow to adopt technology that changes what they do on a day-to-day basis. And it's going back to the power of the cause, well, actually telling your lawyers why you're bringing in these tools, getting them to adapt to these tools and engage with them and think, well, actually, I'm not just going to go out and ask for my passport and proof of address to be certified by the local post office or accountant or bank or whatever it might be. But we can engage technology to help that process along. And that technology now is able to review those bank statements for you and get you to a place where the complicated, long-winded aspects of onboarding and compliance can be, I'm not going to say outsourced, but can be triaged in such a way that you can get to the place that clients want to be at. And let's face it, where lawyers want to be at as well. They want to be completing these transactions sooner, so as not to impact on their margins at the end of the day. They are reliant upon business, and it all feeds back. That good customer service, someone feeling that they've been cared for through that process, and talking to them, as it goes back to managing those expectations, letting the clients know what they can expect through that process, especially in the smaller firms where you're servicing a local town. You're building rapport with the wider community, and that's ultimately going to work in your advantage at the end of the day, even if there's a larger monetary output now to get the tech on board.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I think the technology these days can do a big part of the job, for you guys, and can assist. And as you know, both of you guys are Credas clients, and, you use our technology to help you with that. But at the end of the day, you need to apply that common sense and that human aspect as well to it, don't you? So, but is there ever a time when you guys do, not get asked to sacrifice the compliance, but you feel like the compliance is under sacrifice because of the pressure to get the deal over the line?
I mean, I think sacrifice is the wrong word. I mean, you will have people that will come to you, at pressure points and say, what can we do differently? And I think for me, the size and shape of what we can do starts off very wide. The regulations allow, you see terms like reasonable, risk-based approach, which all indicate that we can effectively have artistic license to do whatever we want to meet the core regulation. Right at the start of the transaction, it's this wide. Right at the end of the transaction, it's this narrow. So I think for me, I genuinely don't think in this day and age, with the amount that we see, in the news, online, circulating around, law society conferences and such, that people are genuinely wanting to sacrifice compliance. I think it's the pressure pushes people to want to do it differently rather than not do it or not be compliant.
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
So I think it's about absolutely defensibility. It's having people buy into, well, actually the culture is here for good reason. You want people to be engaging in that and thinking, well, actually, I understand the wider piece. I know why we are aiming to get these things. And most people I deal with, they're looking for guidance. They're looking for me to be able to say to them, okay, well, risk-based approach can be applied here. Let's look at it holistically, more generally. Are you going to ask Mark Zuckerberg for 6 months of bank statements, and where did he actually get the share distributions from, and can you prove it on paper? That's going to be far different to what you might do if the Cambodian Minister of Transport turns up and says, I'm buying an £8 million house, can you do it for me? It's about that defensibility, and if you get people to engage in that and want to speak to compliance in the right way, then ultimately you get their buy-in from a place that they want to come to it from.
And that's great news, guys, I think, as well, because I think when I speak to companies, I do speak to variant levels. Some companies, they do see compliance as the sales prevention team, and then other businesses literally want to make sure that they're compliant to the rule as well. So it's great to hear that it's transitioning to people understanding the rules and regulations and wanting to actively, you mentioned it earlier, fight financial crime. Our CEO, Phil, he says, when people ask you what you do for a living, don't say you work in compliance, say you're a financial crime fighter, because it sounds far more exciting. But the reality is that's what we're doing. We're stopping these criminal gangs from, impacting our streets and our livelihoods. And not all sort of superheroes wear capes. So we are fighting that financial crime. My final question then for today, and it's a bit of a difficult one, but on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you think the law sector in the UK is compliant and robust?
I think probably 8, and people will say I'm going quite high with that. But it genuinely is a case of, I think people want to be doing the right thing. And if you get your culture right within a firm, people will speak up at the right time and hand over to, so to say, the subject matter expert, the compliance team. Now, where it kind of comes down a little bit is probably around those smaller firms who are fighting commercial pressures and having to get through to the end of the day and the end of the month and paying the mortgage. That's where probably criminals are exploiting that sector quite hard. And I think generally hemming down hard on that sector by regulators is probably doing more damage than actually supporting them in bringing standards up at that level. So I think we're doing pretty well, but it's gearing people, is having the right tools to do what they need to be doing and fighting crime better.
Yeah. I know you, Mike.
I think if we're saying 10 out of 10 is absolute perfection, then I would say we're probably 5.5, 6. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think 5.5, 6 for me is most of the time we're doing it right. It might be a bit scrappy. We might, break some eggs when we're making the cake. But on the whole, are we safe? Are we compliant? Yeah, I think that's okay. We should probably be striving for 7s, 8s, 9s. But I think, yeah, if I'm honest, I think on the whole, the legal sector is still trying to get to grips with it, but are motivated, have the right intentions, and generally are doing the right thing.
And I think that's key as well, the motivation to make sure that you are compliant and robust. So thank you ever so much. And that's the end of today's session. I really appreciate you guys coming down, and we'll look forward to the next session. Thank you.